Our 2024-2025 season previews will continue on today with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So we got the other team in Pennsylvania yesterday, or I think maybe 2 days ago. We did the Philadelphia Flyers. We are now on to the Penguins today. This should be a very interesting one because I feel like there are some people who are really high on Pittsburgh. There are some people who are really low on Pittsburgh. Me personally, I'm somewhere in the middle, to be honest with you. So let's just get straight into it. So in 2021-22, where we're going to start this video off, they went 46, 25, and 11 for 103 points. They were 12th in the NHL. They finish as the lower seed against the New York Rangers. They go up 3-1. They end up blowing that lead and losing this series. It was rough. It was a very rough series in the bottom half of that. They felt like they had it, and then they lost it. The following two seasons were 2 years that really kind of put this team in a questionable spot here in September when I'm making this video. So in 22-23, they went 40, 31, and 11 for 91 points. They were 19th in the NHL. Now I want to put a hypothetical or a star next to that, I guess you could say. That they were 1 point out of the playoffs, or I think it might have been 2 points. They were close. They came really close. And a lot of people expected this past year for the Penguins to get back in the playoffs. Now, they did finish around the same area. However, it was different. It was a way different season than that previous year. They went 38, 32, and 12 this past year for 88 points. They were 19th in the NHL yet again. However, they were still, they were close. They were very close. I think they were 2 or 3 or 4 points out. They were in that range. But they weren't as close in the middling parts of the season. It was kind of a late season push that made their ending stance kind of look like, oh yeah, this team's close. But overall, they had a really rough start to the year. They really couldn't pick it up until the end of the season. They honestly struggled a lot in parts this year, and it makes people a little bit concerned of, well, can this team still, with Sidney Crosby, who just signed a 2-year extension, can this team get to the playoffs and just the playoffs? That's the biggest thing. So let's look at their arrivals and departures. We'll start with their departures because it's a much shorter list. They brought in Riley Smith, Pierre-Olivier Joseph, Jeff Carter, and Jansen Harkins. No big losses there. I guess Riley Smith's a little bit of a loss. They lose kind of like a top 6 forward there in him. I don't think it's that big of a deal, though. They did get some picks back in return for him. The rest of the guys, like Oliver Joseph and Harkins, were kind of just depth players. They were guys who were on your third or fourth line. Joseph, I think, was a third-pairing defenseman at best. Carter was on a bad contract for a while. He is now retired to Penguins fans' celebration. I also think a big part, too, and you can call this a departure, Todd Reirden, the coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins power play, was also fired this past offseason, and that was actually a pretty good move because the Penguins power play was atrocious. And you would think that a Pittsburgh power play, which contained Carlson, Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and honestly Gensel for parts this past year, you would think that power play would be incredible. And it was not. It was one of the worst in the league. So I'm hoping that with them bringing in a different coach, I'm not entirely sure who it is, but if them bringing in someone different could really help out the Pittsburgh Penguins in that way. The guys they brought in Cody Glass, Rutger McGroarty, Anthony Beauvillier, Kevin Hayes, Blake Lizotte, Matt Grzelcyk, and Sebastian Aho, but not the Aho that you're thinking of, the one from the Islanders. The defenseman. So first off, Glass, I like the ad as a good middle 6 forward. Glass definitely struggled to keep himself within the lineup, and I think Pittsburgh's a team that honestly does not have a lot of depth as it is. So it's good to bring in someone like Glass who could probably fit in, make the team out of camp on that third line, and maybe has a good season for you. But I'm Not going to go further than that. McGroarty is a good prospect. He's not one of the best out there, but he's still a really good prospect. Had a great year in Michigan, good year with the Team USA in the World Juniors. But I do think that could be a good add too. It doesn't change Pittsburgh's young future, but McGroarty does definitely make that prospect pool look a little bit better, even though you did give up Brandon Yeager as a just a 1-for-1 deal, which I guess, when you, depending on how you want to look at it, their pool might have gotten a little bit better or a little bit worse, depending on how you feel about the prospects. I do like the add of Beauvillier. He could fit in as a third liner or maybe even a second liner if he does pan out. I like Kevin Hayes. He's probably going to be your fourth line center. They got him on retained money, which isn't that bad. Lizotte, depth forward. I like the add of Grzelcyk. Grzelcyk could fit in immediately as a top 4 defenseman. I've seen some projections put him in the first pairing with Letang, so I do like that. I also like Aho because he's a good third pairing defenseman. So they made some solid moves, and I wouldn't be surprised if this Penguins team does somehow bounce into the playoffs in the last week of the season or something like that. But to be honest with you guys, I am not sky high on them, but I'm not as low as some people are, having them finishing 7th in the division, down in the bottom half of the league. As long as they have Crosby, they will be right in there. If they're not in the playoffs, they will be just barely missing out, most likely. That's where I see the Penguins probably finishing. Let's get into the projected lineup. Per the Hockey News, not per me. But regardless, you start out with Michael Bunting, Sidney Crosby, and Brian Russ as your first line. Then you got Logan O'Connor, Drew O'Connor. It's because Logan signed an extension. Drew O'Connor, Evgeny Malkin, and Ricard Raquel as your second line. So overall, a solid top 6. It's actually pretty good. I like that first line. I think Bunting on a full year with Crosby could really do some wonders. And again, that left wing side is pretty weak, so that does make Bunting your first line center. But I do think that's a strong first line. It's a good second line, but then you got to ask the question, well, how long until these guys actually start aging? Because Malkin's getting up there in age. Raquel isn't that old. O'Connor's relatively young, but it's morely focused on Malkin and I guess Crosby too. Can these guys stay at the consistent levels that they've been? I think that Crosby definitely can. Malkin's a little bit of a question there for me though, because we're getting up there in his career, and is he really going to keep up that production? Your bottom 6, Anthony Beauvillier, Lars Eller, and Cody Glass is your third line. Then you have Nola Chari, Kevin Hayes, and Rucker McGroarty as your fourth line. And then for some extra depth, you have Tristan Braz, Blake Lizotte, and Valtteri Puustinen as your additional depth. So again, there's a few things that I disagree with. I think there's a really good chance that Rucker McGroarty makes this team out of training, or makes the first or second line out of training camp. I think that we know what McGroarty can do. We know how talented he can be. You put him on a first line with Crosby, I think he can honestly do some wonders, to be honest with you. But I don't mind that bottom 6. I'm not as high on it as some other people might be, but I think that it's a lot of older guys who, or guys who really haven't proved themselves. So it's really kind of just a bunch of question marks down there in the bottom 6, besides someone like maybe Lars Eller or, Rucker McGroarty. But apart from that, it's a decent forward core. Your defense is something that has me questioning some stuff. First pairing, Matt Grzelcyk and Chris Letang. Second pairing, Ryan Graves and Erik Karlsson. Third pairing, Marcus Pettersson and Sebastian Aho. And then you have John Ludwig as your extra defender there. So, honestly, good. It's good on paper if it was 10 years ago. I'm being honest with you. But what I have to say is Karlsson last year I thought had a really rough year. I think that, he's still solid offensively. He can get you some points. Defensively, there's some ifs, ands, and buts there. Letang, another one of those guys, too. He had some rough plays last year. I do think, if I'm correct, he was injured. So I'm not 100% sure. I think he did deal with injuries last year. But again, I like the add of Grzelcyk. Most likely a top 4 defenseman, if not your first pairing guy with Letang there. I like Graves on that second pairing, but overall, I'm not entirely sure if you compare it to the other defensive cores in the league, if it's really sustainable, to be honest with you. When you look at your goaltending, you have Jari and Nedeljkovic. That's your same tandem as last year. I think Jari gets a lot of hate. Listen, he's had some controversial plays over the years. There's been some times where I'm like, come on, Jari, really? Why'd you have to do that? But I think he's a little bit overhated. Like, this past year, he had a really good year. And we saw Nedeljkovic get extended, and people thought they're trading Jari. And I'm like, Jari just got extended too. Why would they do that? So I think that, honestly, he gets a little bit of hate that isn't deserved. Nedeljkovic, solid backup goaltender. I thought he had a good, second half of the season last year. And I think that if you can build off of that, that's a pretty solid tandem. But, yeah, I don't know. So if the Penguins miss the playoffs again this year, there's a good chance Mike Sullivan finds his way out the door. It might take a lot for them to fire Mike Sullivan, to be honest with you, but it's not one of the older GMs. It's Kyle Dubas in there as the general manager now. So he might be thinking, well, if this team starts out rough, I'm going to have to pull the trigger on Sullivan. So we'll see what happens there. I think that, honestly, this Pittsburgh Penguins team is definitely interesting. I have them just outside the playoffs or just barely in the playoffs. I don't know. You look at some of the other teams in this league, in this conference especially. I'm not as worried about the Metropolitan because I think the Metro, it's definitely a lot weaker. But the Atlantic has a lot of teams on the come up. They still have, I would say, four very consistent teams. It's probably all going to come down unless Carolina really struggles or there's a big surprise. It's really going to come down to probably that last wild card spot for one of those three Atlantic teams that you see contending, or one of these, I guess, three Metro teams that you see contending. So that's kind of how I look at it. It's going to be a very interesting year for Pittsburgh. If they really do struggle, there's a good chance Mike Sullivan finds his way out. And if they miss the playoffs following this coming year, I know Crosby signed an extension, but there's still going to be those questions of will he get traded? Will he go to win somewhere else? Because if you miss the playoffs 3 years in a row, it's pretty clear that this city or this team might not be in that place to win again. But we'll see. As long as you have Crosby, you will be competitive. You might notice that I'm not really going off of this that much, the yearbook, like I have in the other videos. It's because it's outdated. It talks about Crosby's contract, and I'm like, well, Crosby kind of signed the contract, so I can't really talk about that. But again, if this team starts out rough, things could get ugly. But hopefully they don't do that. Hopefully they bounce back and get back into the playoffs, because I do think that getting Crosby in the playoffs is perfect for the league. But anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe down below. I greatly appreciate it. And anyways, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.